Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism. Hope you and yours are well. I know, I'm going to say it again, it's been a hell of a week. Hell of a week. So wee Rishi Sunak has gone and done it. And so we're under starter's orders and we're off. And to help me talk about it, and I think we'll be quite a long while talking about it, I've got our favourite lawyer from Clickmannanshire and not a candidate, independent for independence in Alloa and Grangemouth. Eva Comrie, how are you?
Hello, Roderick. Well, I'm really depressed that that's another 6 weeks of my life when I'm not going to have any time for dusting or hoovering or ironing. These jobs that have not been done since 2013.
Excited?
Very excited and looking forward to it. Determined to win. Absolutely. Laser focused on winning.
Yeah, well, we're not going to. We'll be talking about it in great length. And also, I've experience from many a general election. In fact, I believe he was there when the younger Pitt was elected. He was standing at a school somewhere in Edinburgh. It's Mr. Quinnan. Or was it Pitt the Elder? I can't remember if it was Pitt the Younger or Pitt the Elder, your first election.
It was Derail, actually.
Oh, there you go. How are you?
I am well. Just looking forward to a rerun of 2003.
Yeah, well, it came as a bit of a shock to us all of us. I mean, it's not often Sunak, nutmegs us all, but I wasn't expecting this. I really thought they would wait till after the party conference, and then perhaps call it with it having getting a bit of wind in their sails, and then go for it. I was shocked, definitely caught off guard. Were you?
Well, definitely caught off guard. But what's emerging now is pretty much, Tory politics. He moved before they moved against him. And it turns out now that the backbenchers were seeking to remove him to prevent him having a general election. But I think that the lasting image for me of this, and I think it's a lasting image of Britain in the early part of the 22nd century or 21st century, was the Prime Minister of Britain standing at a lectern in the pouring rain with no umbrella, no assistant beside him. And that really encapsulated for me exactly how the British establishment see Rishi Sunak. You've had your shot, son. We don't want you anymore. Get out of here. You are abandoned. You are on your own. And what's more, you're drookit. It was actually, think about it, pretty insulting. Can you imagine Thatcher or Heath or Blair or any of the past 10 prime ministers standing outside number 10 Downing Street and there's nobody there with an umbrella? It's really shocking, really, really shocking, Roddy. And maybe he's called it early because he wants to get his revenge in, and that could well be the case.
Yeah, I mean, what about you, Eva? Were you caught out? Were you surprised the early call?
Not particularly, because there have been various events developing over a period of time that slightly pointed towards this as a possibility. But Sally Hughes has said for a couple of months now that she thought it was going to be June or July. So I was alert to that perhaps happening. It doesn't actually make any sense, though, other than, as Lloyd has already said, unless it's about Rishi Sunak getting his revenge in early. Or something really horrible is going to happen in July or August and he wanted out of the road in time for it. And pass the buck to somebody else, probably hoping Labour win and they make a complete arse of it over the course of the next few years and the Tories get a landslide the next time. And that's not unlikely either. But for Scotland, there's an awful lot that should be happening that is not happening, which I'm sure we'll go into.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote a blog today, Lloyd, trying to figure out what the tactics were. You know, I'm a cynic. I'm the world's greatest cynic. But I looked at it and I'm thinking, well, one, this is from a Scottish point of view. Not that they ever give any regard to Scotland. It's the Edinburgh Fair holidays. Now I know they're not as big as they used to be, but you've got the Edinburgh Fair. Most of Lanarkshire, they start on the 29th of June, along with Edinburgh, our capital city. Paisley, Inverclyde, the schools are out. People will be going on holiday those first fortnight. We've got in the middle of June, main campaigning time. We've got the Euros. They're expecting 200,000 Scots, including myself, folks, and I've got tickets there at the Euros. Would it be that added to that? I suggested that with voter ID, the people, should we say, who follow football or who are going on the Fair's trade holidays are not likely to vote Conservative. And if they're out the way and not paying attention, that might help the Tories. Or am I just being too cynical?
I think you're being as cynical as you need to be to deal with British politics, Roddy. But my only kind of divergence from your interpretation is Sunak and his gang are not that clever. This has not been worked out. There's no way this has been worked out in how do we do best. If anything, I agree with not just Eva, but a number of people who are suggesting that there's some terrible train wreck about to come charging down the tracks. But I also think, and this might be the key to it, is the hint now that the International Court of Justice is going to make moves against government ministers of various different countries who have been supportive of the genocidal regime in Israel, knowing that Rishi Sunak is a man with 2 passports and 2 nationalities, he can scoot off to America before that ICJ arrest warrant arrives, and it will never be served on him because America doesn't recognise the International Court. That might have something to do with it. But the idea that they're doing this at a time and it's calculated because of the Euros, I think it's given them too much credit. They don't think that far ahead. I genuinely, as I said in the beginning, I think Sunak made this move before he was moved against. And I think it shows you just how the level of support and honour that there are amongst the leading lights of the Conservative Party at the moment, that they will abandon the country for the sake of preserving their own personal reputations, even if it's a reputation that currently is sliding about in the gutter somewhere.
Yeah, when you're talking about he's maybe skipping the country before the ICJ go after him, and I thought, I'm a cynic. My God, that's even beyond my cynicism. But here's the thing: it's almost a foregone conclusion election, Eva. And I mean, you know, I'm going to try and play devil's advocate for a bit longer in this. But is there any way this early election could save a few seats? Could tip it in their balance? Could he do a 1992 John Major and snatch victory from the jaws of defeat?
I don't know. Can I say on the back of what Lloyd was saying there, I think it was quite ironic that people in the SNP were complaining that the election was going to happen during the school summer holidays here. Because obviously, excuse me a minute, the schools go on holiday earlier here than they do down in England. But the whole reason that this is an issue for the SNP is because they didn't bother getting the finger out doing something about independence. So they really don't have the right to argue about it. I remember the 92 election very well because that's when Andy Brophy was our candidate here in our previous constituency. And we had a fantastic campaign, had a reasonable level of vote. And Labour were cock-a-hoop that, of course, they won here yet again and broken-hearted that the Tories had got back in. And I would rule nothing out because I think Keir Starmer is possibly prone to having some banana skin moments. He might do a Neil Kinnock on the beach type thing and it all goes very badly wrong. So I would take nothing for granted. And what I certainly wouldn't be doing is looking at my ballot paper thinking, what's the best way to get the Tories out? Because I'm sick, fed up hearing that already, and we're only a couple of days into it. This election, from a Scottish perspective, ought not to be about how to get the Tories out. It should be about how to get Scotland out of the Union. That's what should be happening. And every Scottish independence-minded politician and activist should be saying so and shouting it from the rooftops. The fact that they're not tells you all you need to know about where most of their priorities lie.
Yeah, you know, I'm an old sales and marketing man, as you know, Lloyd, and a bit of a political animal and anorak, but I'm looking at July the 4th. There's no one in the Western world that doesn't know what July the 4th is. It's the biggest Independence Day in the world. And as I said in my article today on Friday, the blog, they're saying stop the Tories. I mean, if ever there was leverage, Lloyd, or, you know, on Independence Day, vote for independence, is there anybody in the SNP with a bit of brains?
No. I think that's the short, simple answer. I mean, if the current leader of the Scottish National Party can stand up and say that 10 days after he was effectively crowned rather than elected, that he's the most popular political leader in Scotland, then delusion is high. I took part in the 2003 Scottish Parliament elections with Mr. Swinney as the leader of the party and the leader of the campaign. And we all know what the result there was. It was an absolute disaster for the Scottish National Party, and of course led to John having to resign and the return of Alex Salmond as the leader of the party, which led us to the possibly the best 7 years of government that we've had in this country since the advent of devolution. I find it utterly and completely horrific that the current buzzwords being used by the Scottish National Party and potential Scottish National Party candidates are the words change, and that's straight from the Labour Party playbook. So what they're doing is they're sending out the Labour Party's message, change. And the second part of it is get rid of the Tories, which is the second part of the Labour Party's statement. Now, how they came to the conclusion that going to the Scottish electorate with get rid of the Tories and change, when in reality they're asking the Scottish people to vote again for the SNP, who sent, you know, frankly, a next to useless group of members of Parliament to Westminster, to me just shows that those core political values were clearly being stated do not exist in the higher echelons of the Scottish National Party, or indeed amongst the special advisors that the Scottish National Party has. They would not be going into this election if they were serious about the mission statement of the party, which is the achievement of sovereignty and the independence of our country. They could not possibly go into this election with a wounded and fragmented Tory party, a wounded and fragmented in England Labour Party. This afternoon, Friday afternoon, Jeremy Corbyn announced that he will be standing, and he will not be the only ex-Labour independent candidate standing against the Labour Party. But here in Scotland, we have the Scottish National Party using the Labour Party's mantra of change and get rid of the Tories. This is insane. But then again, am I surprised? Having fought an election under John's leadership as a member of the Scottish National Party, I was an MSP at the time. I fight against Jack McConnell, and John won't even turn up in the constituency. And McConnell was the sitting First Minister, and the leader of the Scottish National Party did not believe it was necessary for him to show his presence in the constituency of the leader of the Labour Party. This is not real politics. But as I said in last week's programme, never forget, the British are back in charge. Thanks, John.
Yeah, it is quite worrying. Eva, there is no doubting that if the polls are running the way we're hearing, and we've been saying in this show for months and months and months and months, Indies at 50% plus, the SNP votes dropping, and there was a poll out, albeit I believe it to be an outlier. But Techie, can you stick up that poll? where it says they would be wiped out, they wouldn't actually retain a single seat now. It is the Express, and it is a polling company I'd actually never bloody heard of, and probably a bit, bit of a propaganda. But we do know that their vote is slipping. They're going to take a pounding.
They're going to take an absolute hammering. And part of the reason for that is the performance from John Swinney relative to the difficulties of Michael Matheson and complaining that he'd been ill done by. The hard, horrible fact of the matter is that Michael Matheson should have resigned. He should have fallen on his sword a long time ago. That he's still in a job with a substantial salary beyond the wildest dreams of most of his constituents speaks volumes. So that was a bad start to the campaign for the SNP, made even worse by those members of the SNP and those SNP candidates who have said, Tony Guglielmo for Falkirk being one of them, that what Scotland needs is a strong contingent of SNP MPs at Westminster. No, that's not what Scotland needs. What Scotland needs is a strong contingent of MPs empowered by the popular vote of the people of Scotland with a majority of Scottish seats, authorised to negotiate an independent settlement and to walk out of Westminster and not look back. The fact that every single SNP MP or candidate has a crowdfunder that refers to Stronger for Scotland, make Scotland's voice heard, that they have to be in the majority, tells you all you need to know, that their agenda is to remain at Westminster and to hope that Labour somehow agree another independence referendum. It won't happen if Labour think that yes might win it, that independence might win out. It will not be. You don't win independence by bleating at Westminster about how horrible they are to the Scots. You win independence by empowering and liberating the people of Scotland and giving them the courage and the confidence and the self-belief and the self-esteem and the optimism to believe that independence is the right thing for the country and for the people of the country. And that's where the SNP have signally failed us. All over Twitter in the last few days, you're seeing folks saying, oh, no, not another one of these. We've had this for 10 years. Stronger for Scotland, make Scotland's voice heard, stop Brexit on the side of a bus, exclusive revelations of things that never came to pass, promises and undertakings to deliver energy companies and house building and a whole load of stuff that was going to be record performances, recognised worldwide and, subject to international acclaim, when actually the SNP have succeeded in bringing Scotland, in some respects, almost to its knees, whether you're talking about the justice system, the prisons, the low numbers of police, problems in education, a whole load of areas where they've let us down because those in power have neither the ability, the knowledge, the experience, the drive, the vitality, or the vision to build the country that Scotland should be. And they certainly, in the main, with a few notable exceptions, don't have the drive and the determination and the courage to fight for independence and to deliver a positive case to the people of Scotland to encourage them to vote for independence. They should hang their heads in shame, practically every one of them.
Absolutely, they should. I mean, you can tell the atmosphere, everything you're seeing on social media, you're hearing on the doorstep everywhere, Lloyd, is that this is going to be a painful one for the independence movement. I don't personally think so. I think getting rid of these SNP MPs will maybe be the shot, and I'm hoping it will be the shot in the armour, if you prefer, the kick in the family jewels, that will waken some of them up. Do you think that a real slaughtering would give them a wake-up call?
I really don't know, Roddy, because, just let me just put a message out there for all these people who are saying stronger voice, SNP MPs, Westminster only listens when there's a large group of SNP MPs.
Oh.
Right, 2015, you win 56 out of 59 seats. Now, when I joined the Scottish National Party, that was a mandate to begin immediate negotiations for independence. So for all you people out there about strong voice, Scotland will be listened to with a group of SNP MPs. Tell me how much has been listened to between 2015 and today. The fact of the matter is, The 56 should have delivered independence. Anything after that was kidding the people on, which is why at every subsequent general election, turnout in Scotland, particularly amongst pro-independence working class voters, has gone down and down and down, because they don't believe you anymore, because they don't see and they don't hear a strong voice, because a strong voice doesn't mean talking, it means action. And there has been no action whatsoever. And I go back again to the insulting words of Rishi Sunak, Prime Minister of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, when he called 50%, 51, 52% of the population of this country extremists, and their representatives, their strong voice in Westminster, did what? Asked for an apology, didn't get an apology, and sat down like the good little children they are. So for any of you out there who believe that sending Scottish National Party members to Westminster to be your voice, you all need a hearing aid. You've got it wrong.
Correct. They've all got laryngitis. Eva, Lloyd talks about 56 out of 59, big strong voice, you would think, and they went down. And when the Scotland Act was going, the Scotland Bill was going through at that time, the SNP put up over 100 amendments. Not one of them get accepted. There was only one Liberal, one Tory, one Labour. Murray, Carmichael, and wee Davy from down in the borders for the Tories. That's the point where Nicola Sturgeon, then leader of the party, should have said, right, everybody out of there, we're just declaring independence, because they're not listening when 56 of the 59 elected under the British rules are ignored completely. And it's been downhill ever since then.
She should have said, up the road now. Yes. And we're off to the international courts. We're going to speak, to countries worldwide who have sympathy with us. And we're going to get international support, because this is democracy. People have voted for the party that favours independence and voted for that in overwhelming numbers. But that's not what happened, because she was at best a coward. There are worse things. So I cannot understand why the SNP keeps repeating the same mistakes and talks about the strong Scottish voice, because the SNP are not alone in speaking for Scotland. I would suggest that they have no longer the right to speak for the people of Scotland if independence is not something that they are actually putting front and centre of their campaign. Front and centre of their campaign is Westminster, rather than return to Scotland of democratic rule. They like to talk at election time about independence. They no longer have an independence minister in the Scottish Parliament. He's got a different job now. We've got, is it 10 or 11 independence papers that they've written in the Scottish Parliament in the last few years, and you could condense and distill the entire contents of all of those pages into the back of a fag packet, because it's all completely and utterly irrelevant without a plan to achieve independence. They talk all the time about jam tomorrow, but they don't tell you what you're going to put on your piece today. It's not going to work. The SNP won't achieve it because they don't know what they're doing, or they don't want to change direction. I met John Swinney a long time ago, 30 odd years ago it would be, when I was an SNP councillor. And he might be Mr. Nice Guy for all I know. I don't know him personally, but he's yesterday's man. He is not the man to lead Scotland to liberation. He is not the man to inspire a nation. And some of his colleagues, for example, my own local representatives, Keith Brown and John Nicholson, should maybe take a leaf out of my book and go for a wee walk around the town centre at Alloa, where they both have offices, because I did that today. And I don't want to talk the place down, but in some parts it's dirty, it's littered, there's potholes, empty shops, boarded up shops, and like so many other places in Scotland, the town centre mainly comprises takeaways, cafes, betting shops, bookies, charity shops. All the little individual sole traders are going out of business or have gone out of business, and there's half a dozen supermarkets in the environs. The absolute heart is being knocked out of town centres and communities right across this country. And I would suggest that most politicians are completely and utterly out of touch with that. They don't understand what's happening to the normal, ordinary, working people that have had the stuffing knocked out of them by the pandemic and the disastrous reaction to that, the poor planning by a First Minister, Miss Sturgeon, who had previously been the Health Secretary, who should have known about how to plan for a pandemic and made a backside of it. No preparation for courts, no preparation for prisons, no preparation for police officers, no preparation for schools. All the governmental organisations that should have had training in place, should have had preparation in place, didn't have it. And yet that had been her job when she was the health minister, to look at things like this. So folks suffered through the pandemic. Children's education suffered during the pandemic. We started to recover from it, but we'd had Brexit to contend with as well. That should not have been something for Scots to have to worry or wonder about, because the Brexit referendum should have led to Scottish independence there and then. That it didn't is Nicola Sturgeon's epitaph, because she, as an individual, owes the people of Scotland one massive apology for her shortcomings, some of which appear to be coming home to roost now.
Absolutely. I'm of the view when these 100 amendments were knocked back, Lloyd, and Sturgeon got a phone call, just imagine, this is my cynicism again, and saying, we've knocked back 100 of your amendments of your Scotch MPs, Sturgeon. There's a cheque for 1.2 million coming. And that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what they did. And I remember being at the ALBA conference and I put forward a motion for abstentionism and I get beaten, well beaten, because the two sitting MPs, Mr McCaskill and Mr Hanvey and Alex Salmon at their back were saying, well, this is we're going to disrupt. You saw how we disrupt. We're going to disrupt again and we will. Just support us to go back to Westminster. There's not been any disruption since. They get too cosy down there. That's the problem, Lloyd.
I think the major difficulty is if you accept the system, you accept the rules of Westminster, as opposed to simply acknowledging them, as opposed to making yourself subservient to them, then you've got no room to manoeuvre. You will actually bow to the pressures of that institution. And, you know, to some degree, it takes very, very strong characters to be able to do it, but you have to have a plan to begin with. If you don't have a plan of how you're going to deal with Westminster before you get there, then you're scuppered, because they will draw you in. They will place responsibility on you that you should be saying, I'm sorry, that's not my responsibility. For instance, attendance and being members of committees of the House, right? Firmly part of the structure. Now, most people believe that these committees are primarily about policy. They're not. They're primarily about housekeeping of the rules and the structures of the British government, the British civil service, the British ruling structures, plus Westminster. Now, if you take the approach, which is, we've been elected, we are here to represent our people. I do not need to be on that committee. I do not need to be on that committee. I do not have to attend this meeting or that meeting because it doesn't directly affect the people who sent me here. Now, the big problem is far too many people think that the desires, the wishes, and the responsibilities laid on you by the Houses of Westminster are more important than the people that elected you. That's wrong. If you have that attitude, you're in the wrong game. You shouldn't be in politics. You should be in showbiz, because in reality, Westminster is an adjunct of show business. But the real issue here is, how can any member of the Scottish National Party go to the country now, go out there and ask people to vote for them upon what record? The Westminster record doesn't exist because you're ignored. And currently, our government, our record in the Scottish government for the Scottish National Party has been utterly disastrous under the 9 years despotism of Mrs. Murrell. I mean, what's unravelled in Scotland over the past couple of weeks, in particular relation to, primary ideological drivers for the current Scottish National Party, which have, you know, crashed on the rocks of employment tribunals, amongst other things. These are the things they need to be addressing. They have to realise that if you get yourself into a situation where an employment tribunal of all things, is effectively cutting right to the heart of an ideological policy that has emerged from within the Scottish National Party, then you really need to go and have a seat and have a chat with yourself. And I would say this to anyone that's out there who's thinking about voting for any of them, Labour, Liberal, Tory, Scottish National Party. There is only one question in this election that's of great, great importance outside of the independence question. It's about good governance, and it's this. Anyone who wants your vote, you ask them one question. What is a woman? And if the answer is not an adult human female, then you cannot and you must not vote for that individual, because that's a person who would deny science, who would deny biology, and more importantly than that, they would rob the rights, hard-won rights, of 51% of this population. That in itself is a principal reason for not voting for any of them at this stage, and a very good reason for voting for independents who understand the nature of the needs of the people of this country.
Here they do. And another question you can ask some folks, if they're Tory, Labour or Liberal, the English registered parties, do you support the genocide in Gaza? And if they hum and haw, which they will, because they all support it, don't vote for them either. They're killing babies, mothers, innocent fathers, children, the lot. So just ignore them all. Eva, this election is going to be a very, very quick one. And because it's caught everyone in the hop, understandably, it's going to be sort of different. As I've alluded to, as I was in my article on Friday and again today on here, there's going to be an awful lot of distractions. So how do you see this election? Will it be straight from the studios, or will you be out knocking doors? How will the rest of them be acting, do you think?
I've been knocking doors and speaking to people about the need for independence for the last 5 decades. And there's a lot of people like me, similarly minded. The issue is distinguishing between those who want to have a career as a politician and those who feel that they've been thrust into the political limelight temporarily to make sure that the job gets done, because those who've been trying to do it so far haven't tried hard enough and haven't succeeded. So quite honestly, I want elected to Westminster so that I can walk back out the door again, come north and be part of setting up the independent Republic of Scotland. And I would like to think that because we're going to have 57 MPs from Scotland and 29 of them are going to be independent support, and I want to be one of those 29. And you're not telling me that Scotland's no got 29 people with a backbone sufficient enough to persuade and energise and optimise the population to vote for them and to vote for their own future. Not a future shackled to a union which is outdated and outmoded and has outlived any value it ever had, and that value itself is highly questionable. Where we are today in Scotland is walk round, as I did today, Alloa Town Centre, or take a look up the Ochil Hills, or wander over to Grangemouth, or go beyond my constituency and look at, for example, the Kelpies in Falkirk, or Edinburgh Castle, Stirling Castle, the Bruce Memorial and Monument, Dunfermline Abbey, all the different parts of Scotland that eat away at your heart when you know how badly served our country currently is by the current state of government and that set up in Westminster. And just think to yourself what a wonderful, fabulous, fantastic place Scotland would be if decisions were made by competent, sensible people at home in Scotland on behalf of the people of Scotland. You wouldn't have pensioners that couldn't pay their bills. You wouldn't have mothers who can't buy themselves shoes because they're spending all their money looking after their wains. You wouldn't have issues with folk that I know in my lifetime used to, and again currently are, doing stupid things like burning rubbish in a coal fire because they can't afford to buy coal, but it's the quickest way of getting a heat. You wouldn't be standing in George Square listening to folk like Anne-Marie Ward and others talking in terms of drugs deaths and how awful they are, you would have the money to put into all the causes and all the effects of poverty. We would eradicate poverty within, what, a decade? Drugs deaths would plummet, deaths from alcohol would plummet. People would have hope. That one precious, precious thing that you don't have in the Union, the ability to change the lives of all Scots, living and yet to live, yet to be born. Transformational power is what independence brings. And we need leadership, collective leadership of dozens of souls similarly minded to drive that message home and give people confidence that we can actually make it happen and make it work, make the country and make the government work for the people, you know, elected by the people, for the people, to deliver for the people. That's what we need. That's what this election could be. And there's time to make that happen if there's political will. What won't cut it is this strong voice rubbish. People are fed up listening to that. It's embarrassing, and it's a waste of life and a waste of human potential.
Here, absolutely. And folks, I know very soon, I know, Eva, you're looking for a premises to have as a headquarters somewhere in the constituency. And folks, as soon as we know that, we'll let you know. And if you want to volunteer to help, Eva, you've got to let us know. You know how to get in touch with us. Eva's looking for people to help. There's leaflets to be delivered, doors to be knocked. There's all sorts of stuff to be done. And get in touch. Lloyd, you've been a few elections over your time. How do you see this one? It's a sprint, this one. You know, there was no, you know, normally you can figure out it's going to be a while and it's sort of a slow build up to it. This one's so quick. How do you see it being fought out?
I think when you have a sprint election like this, it's usually the party that calls it is trying to minimise the damage it's going to suffer. That's usually the reason for it. Now, we're going into this, and this is where you have to get into the nuts and bolts of it. Now, the Tory party have money. The Labour Party have a huge amount of money because they've been getting enormous amounts from their genocide-supporting Zionist friends. The Scottish National Party, on the other hand, has no money. Absolutely no money, which is why, for the first time in a long time, we're seeing all of the Westminster SNP MPs announcing they've got crowdfunders. They're suddenly doing fundraising events, some of which they had booked in, but they've had to cancel because of this short campaigning time. Now, that tells you that the party has no money and it's needing to galvanise or attempt to galvanise some sort of activist base. But the reality is, for the first time in a very, very long time, the Scottish National Party really doesn't have an activist base. A party which was based on activism no longer has that because the primary activism over the last two elections has been done by what is commonly called the payroll and the family, because that's what it's become. The SNP is a bureaucracy. It is in the business of perpetuating itself. It's not in the business of politics. It's in the business of perpetuating itself. That's all. The Labour Party, as I said, has money. The Liberal Democrats have got next to no money. So in some ways, Eva and Sally Hughes particularly are actually, without, you know, forget the issue of media coverage, but in terms of having a financial level playing field, they're probably closer to it than any independent candidates have ever been before. With the possible exception of Dr. Jean Turner, who won the Scottish Parliament seat in 2003. Now, that to me is a really, really positive thing, because we're not going to get completely, the independents are not going to be swamped by the big parties, except in terms of the way that the media will treat them. But the wonderful thing for Eva and Sally is, because they're local, they're already known locally. They still have that wonderful thing that we have in Scotland, which are local newspapers and local radio stations. These are things where certainly Sally and Eva will be able to tap into. And in this short period of time, hopefully that will work for them. But I think the main thing that's going to work for them here is the parties are in disarray. That's clear. Yeah. It's really clear. The Labour Party think they've got a plan. but they haven't had to answer any questions yet. And it's going to be interesting, as Eva said earlier, it'll be interesting to see just exactly how Keir Starmer does, or will there be the banana skins? I believe there will be.
Yeah, I hope there is. I don't want to embarrass you, but I've looked at some of these crowdfunders by prominent SNP MPs and even other parties, and all added together, they haven't touched what your good self has managed to raise. And there is a fact that people are, pulling away from the parties. There is a movement towards independence, not just here in Scotland, independence for independence. We saw it down south. We've seen it in the local elections in England. The people are fed up with the political parties because they talk a lot and do hee-haw.
And they have divided loyalties because their loyalty principally is to the party, not to the people that they represent. So what I'm finding, and I know Sally's finding it too, is that when you start to engage with people about politics and you talk about the election to begin with, they're a bit annoyed and they're a bit glum, and they start usually a bit of a rant about how the politicians are out of touch. And you say, no, wait a minute, I'm not in a political party. I'm independent. I'm also for independence, but I want to represent the voices and the views and the interests of the local people that I know, that I've grown up beside, that I live beside, that I work beside. It's a light bulb moment, and there's a, thank God I found somebody else that thinks like me, because, by the way, did you know what the issue here is? And it's something to do with a school, or it's bins, or it's planning. And it's usually a whole load of stuff that isn't even part of Westminster's reserved powers. It's more often than not council-related stuff. But people are needing a representative to listen to them, who is able to be articulate, to organise looking into a problem for them, and just speak to whoever it is that's the service deliverer or provider that's not doing the job properly and get it fixed, or source the result for them, or source the support for them, whether it's because they need home care, or it's been too long on a waiting list for an operation, or these kind of things. Everyday bread and butter problems that ordinary people have. That's the kind of thing that folk on the doorsteps want to talk about. There's then the bigger picture where they do want to talk about the Constitution, and they want to see action on independence. So if you'd slightly park the local stuff, which is hugely important, go on to the Constitution, I would say, broadly speaking, within this Alloa and Grangemouth constituency, it's evident that support for independence is more than 50%. Clackmannanshire needs to lose its reputation as being the no county. It's the yes county now. There is a majority in favour of independence here. And people want to know, how is it going to be delivered? They don't want any more of this. A vote for the SNP is a vote for independence. They want a plan. They want a route map. They want to know, how do we get from A to B? Stop telling us that when we're independent, we're all going to have big pensions. Stop telling us when we're independent, we're going to have loads of council houses built. Stop telling us that when we're independent, the mortgage rate's going to be low. Stop telling us that when we're independent, the NHS will be fully funded. Get the job done, but get the job done starting today. And it is, again, back to the Scotland United approach. If Scotland United doesn't happen as the result of the SNP and Alba and other folk, not the ISP because they're in favour of Scotland United, but if it doesn't happen because the big beasts and those big parties can't sit down, as I said earlier in another edition of this, and smoke the pipe of peace, then the leaders of those parties will have the wrath and the ire of the Scottish people to contend with in years to come, and it will not be a pretty sight.
No, you're right, it won't. And that is the problem, Lloyd, that there is too much tribalism. I mean, in politics in general. I mean, it's unionist to independentista. It's tribal, and nothing will shift the hardcores. But within the independence movement, sometimes we're our own biggest enemies. And, we've got to learn. And I would say, I've got to say to the Alba party, I think you made a horrific mistake by putting in an excellent man like Kenny McCaskill and putting him into Grangemouth against Eva. You're not helping yourself. You're not helping the people of Alloa and Grangemouth. You're actually helping those people who want to close the refinery. We really need to get our act together and unite, do we not, Lloyd?
Yes, we do, Roddy, but, independent supporters are united. We know what we want. The problem comes with the bureaucracies and the political elite. And to some degree, any of those that have been seriously influenced by Westminster over the years get locked into the idea of that they know better than everybody else, that they have this political seer, brand seer kind of wisdom that's going to lead them to the promised land. Well, history tells us that's just bollocks. Now, in this particular election, to me, having been active in politics for a long, long time in the national movement, when you have a situation where the national movement is at 53% and the Scottish National Party is at 30 or 31%, then you've got a really serious issue. If other independent supporting parties then take the same line as the SNP, which is it's our ball, we're going home, then in actual fact, they do not help themselves either in the short, the medium, or most especially in the long term. But as I said at the very beginning, this is attitudes that are built on an acceptance of the British system. It creates elite thinking in people's minds who, instead of realising, as Eva just beautifully laid out, the purpose of being elected is to represent your constituents. Your purpose is not solely and alone to support your party. The party is a mechanism, but for a party like the Scottish National Party, it until it achieves its aim, which is the achievement of independence, then the more and more that the SNP or the other parties like ALPA or the Scottish Socialist Party or the Green Party allow themselves to play the game entirely according to Westminster rule, then they will get into the same comfort zone as that donut with the castle in Dundee, Chris, whatever his name is, where they think themselves to be above the people who voted for them. Now, only in Britain do you get that kind of attitude. And it is the breaking of that in our politics here in Scotland where we say, no, we do not do politics the British way anymore. We do it on the basis of people know that when they go to vote for somebody, that person is going to represent them and the people of their area first and foremost, and that the party and the party's aims are secondary to that. Now, that is the opposite of the British system, and it's always been frowned upon. Even within my own party, the Scottish National Party, people were refused the right to stand in elections because when they were asked the one question, if the party tells you one thing and your constituents tell you another thing, whose side will you be on? And if you didn't say the parties, then you were off the list. Now, I'm sorry. If you've gone down that road, you've already lost the argument, because political parties that become bureaucracies become like the British parties. But if you are a political party whose aim is the achievement of independence and your removal from the state that you're currently in, then you cannot possibly go down the route of bureaucracy. But unfortunately, here we are in 2024, we find ourselves in a country where our leading party of independence and unfortunately the rising party of independence seem not to have been able to shake off the shackles of British politics and that preservation of the bureaucracy before the needs of the people. We need to get over this. Eva can do that, Sally can do that, and I'm sure others will as well.
Yeah, you're absolutely. I'll not mention them person by name till maybe next time they're on the show, but I know of someone who went for vetting, a well-known anti-nuclear person, and was asked that famous question, if the party changed its policy and decided to support nuclear weapons in Scotland and the use of them, would you support that? At which they said, well, no, I couldn't support that. And they didn't get, they failed vetting for that very question. Everything else was a piece of cake. And that's just a fact. That's how they do it, folks. That's how they wheedle it out. Now, Eva, you've not been vetted by anyone but yourself. You're going to be vetted by the people. And that's the way it should be. The people should vet you, not some party machinery.
What I would like to think is that the people will vet me and that they'll see somebody who's just like them, who thinks the way that they do, who understands how they live the way that they do and what their ambitions actually are. Because my ambitions are pretty much the same as most folk that I know. You want to have a nice house, you want your health and that of your family to be looked after, you want your children and your neighbours' children to be properly educated. And these are the areas that Scotland currently is not doing as well as it should in and could do a hell of a lot better. And if you look at the political landscape in Scotland and you look at the landscape of abilities of the people of our country and what our folk have got to offer and got to contribute to Scotland as well as internationally, you see that we are a nation of very capable, intelligent, strong thinkers, independent minds. And for that reason alone, I cannot understand why we remain shackled like sheep to Westminster. This week, one particular item that I read that I was really fascinated by was by Alec Neil, and it was about housing and how you could solve the housing crisis. It's on Jim Siller's website. It must be read, it must be shared. And I really sincerely hope that John Swinney and those around him have read it, and that John Swinney actually takes Alec Neil's advice and appoints a housing minister, because Alec explains eloquently and tragically about the number of people in Scotland who are homeless. What is the explanation for this? There are multiple strands through this, starting with Thatcher selling council houses and those not being replaced. But this has continued over the course of the last couple of decades to the extent where we've got declared a national housing emergency. But the numbers of houses that the Scottish Government are planning to be built is nowhere near achieving the status that we need to be able to house all of our people. 30,000 homeless in Scotland a year, 15,000 families. No, this is a tragedy that unfolds on a daily basis for people who should be living under safe, warm roofs in comfortable accommodation. That's one area where the Scottish Government is failing, but Alec Neil has given them a plan that involves finance, pension money, how to train a workforce. There's a whole load of benefits in there if you have a national house building drive. You don't just build houses, you give folk jobs, you get the economy going. There's no downside to any of that. It's all productive. There are other experts who know what they're talking about. I mentioned Anne-Marie Ward earlier. The advice that she gives, the content of the Right to Recovery Bill, where the right to recovery is about your health, where drugs issues are dealt with as health policy and social policy, not as criminal matters, but as individual human rights issues. Now, that bill is promoted by the Tories, and it's probably because it's promoted by the Tories that other people are not jumping on it and saying this is a bloody good idea. Instead, what's happening is charities who are funded by the Scottish Government are speaking out against it, or saying that they want to speak out against it, but it's politically a little bit unsafe so to do. Hogwash. There are far too many people in Scotland captured by the drugs tragedies, and it affects thousands of people beyond those who are addicted or who use. It affects their families, their friends. It has an enormous economic and social cost, and it arises in the main from poverty. It's like the prison numbers are far too high. We had the Chief Executive Officer in February complaining that Scottish Prison Service were in a crisis. It took until May for the Justice Minister to do something about it. You know, all of these are areas of Scottish life that could be so much better if the government listened to the folk who know what they're talking about, and actually, instead of listening to spin doctors or appointing ministers from a very particularly awful gene pool, they listen to the Alec Neils of this world, the Anne-Marie Wards, the James Dohertys, you know, or the other experts in relation to reduction of crime, reduction of harm, social work experts like Maggie Mellon, who would write until the cows come home about what's wrong with transgender ideology. These are all people who have so much to contribute to Scottish society if they were listened to. That's the kind of Scotland that we need to build, a collaborative, positive, optimistic approach where you roll your sleeves up, you sort out the problems, and you make tomorrow better than today was.
Absolutely. There's Eva talking about experienced people who have got so much to contribute, Lloyd. And if I could move on just slightly, because one of the things in politics, one of our ex-First Ministers, Nicola Sturgeon, if you remember her, she said this week, Techie, can you stick up that quote from Miss Sturgeon about Scottish politics being too full of people who've come through the political ranks? Sorry. And I don't often get caught for words, Lloyd, but when I read this article, I thought, is she having a laugh? Or does she think we're all that stupid? She was the very one that encouraged us. She was the one who went into the broom cupboard to bring them back. She was the one that pushed aside the Alec Neils and the experienced guys, the good guys, to bring in these kids straight out of school. The hypocrisy of the woman is unbounded.
There's nothing hypocritical about this, Roddy. This is the final confirmation. She watches through a Scottish prism. Because we talked about this. We talked about this on how many occasions over the past few months? But bizarrely, now that she's reinvented herself as not only a literary expert, but she's reinvented herself as a political analyst, skills that she's never shown us ever before in her entire career in terms of political analysis. But I find this incredible. I genuinely find it incredible. You know, are we watching the psychological unraveling of a deeply flawed individual? I mean, I said this, I think I said this probably in the first or the second program that I did was, you know, these people live in a world where when they say it, therefore it is true. But if 5 minutes later they say something else, that is equally as true as the opposite thing they said 5 minutes before. That's Nicola's style. This is, you know, she's cottoned on to what people are saying. Oh, there's too many. I mean, there's the Emma Roddicks of this world. I mean, you didn't have to be young to be useless, right?
No, I can vouch for that. I can vouch for that.
Hello there, Mr. Swinney. You know, I mean, let's be honest about this. You know, stupidity comes at all ages. Experience is a different thing. A really very, very different thing. And experience in politics is something which is absolutely required. If a parliament does not reflect the nature of its society, and that means having people from their 80s down to 18 to 20, but you have to cover the entire spectrum. If you don't, then you're not representative of your nation, and you will not get the ideas, you won't get the experiences fed in debate, if debate is worth anything. But I think we've found out over particularly the Sturgeon years, that debate in the Scottish Parliament is not about debate. It's about people standing up on the SNP side and pledging their allegiance to the great god Nicola and saying everything that she wants to hear, and then other people get up and say that's a lot of rubbish. And nobody actually listens to each other. When was the last time a vote was changed in the Parliament by someone's debating skills or the presentation of an argument? I mean, to my knowledge, maybe 2001 was the last time that happened. But the hypocrisy of someone who was so lacking in absolute confidence in her own ability that she needed to surround herself with people. And this happened long before she was First Minister, I can assure you. This began in the very, very first Parliament between 1999 and 2003. Nicola had already started to develop that army of acolytes who were people who would never question what she had to say. It developed over those years, and finally we ended up with a parliamentary group in Westminster that's not fit for purpose, and a parliamentary group that makes up the government of Scotland that is not fit for purpose, because the only people who were allowed to join that little merry band were people that wouldn't say boo to Mrs. Goose. That's the simple fact of it. And the fact that she's now even attempting to try and convince the rest of the world that in actual fact, it wasn't me, mate. You know, a big boy did it and ran away. It's absolutely astonishing. And it shows this is a flawed individual, a deeply flawed, and more to come, I would imagine.
Absolutely. She was the one that wanted to be Chief Mammy. That was the one that was Chief Mammy, as our old colleague Yvonne Ridley would say. But there's Element this week. Now, you know me and my, I don't believe in coincidences, Eva. But Sturgeon tried to tell her resignation a few weeks before her husband, Peter, was arrested was just a coincidence. Yeah. it's the cynic in me again, Eva. I don't buy this one, I'm sorry. Do you?
I believe in coincidences just as much as Don Corleone believed in coincidences when he was talking about bringing his son back to America. No, this is painful actually to watch how this all dissembles, and it's extremely irritating to see that, you know, as Lloyd was referring to earlier there, the young who were promoted and the acolytes that surrounded the former First Minister, because she wanted to be surrounded by people that were not her equal in her eyes, rather than if you wanted to run the government and run the country properly and competently, you would be honest and you would employ and you would encourage and you would promote and you would support the best brains and the biggest hearts and the stoutest hearts and the greatest quality. And yes, of course, you would bring young folk under your wing if you thought that they had potential and that they deserved to be promoted. What you wouldn't do is have zipped lists like the SNP did. And now, when you come to the position that you're in, where slowly, over a period of time, we're starting to get little chinks appearing in the armour, and we've gone from somebody who still had an awful lot left in the tank to eventually saying, well, actually, the transgender issue was part of the bigger picture. Slowly but surely, we're getting to the truth that we all know is there. It's like the Wizard of Oz, when the curtain comes back, the curtain was always going to fall. It was known the Empress had no clothes. Everybody else knew it. It was just going to take time for it to be admitted. You know, look back on the Sturgeon years and ask, what benefit was there in any of those years for either the people of Scotland or the cause of Scottish independence? What is actually their legacy? It isn't even the baby box. And over the course of the next few weeks, we're going to see an SNP manifesto, and we're going to see a lot of different leaflets that tell you what the SNP have achieved for Scotland. At Westminster, what did they achieve for Scotland? A big fat zero. In Scotland, what has the SNP achieved for Scotland? Quite a lot under Alex Salmond, very little, if anything, under Nicola Sturgeon, zero with Hamza Yousaf, and now with John Swinney, we're holding back the years, turning back the clock. It's not good. It's not what Scotland needs, not what Scotland deserves.
Nope.
It's time for a major sea change.
Absolutely. And it's independence or not my parliament, depending on what constituency you're in. Folks, we've run out of time, but over the coming 6 weeks, maybe the exception of when I'm in Germany, supporting our nation as a member of the Tartan Army, Private MacLeod, we will be bringing on as many independence candidates or people, I've got to be honest, people I view as good independent candidates on here. Although I'm willing to have on, I have invited Mr. Wishart on many occasions to come on here and give us his bit. Delighted to have him on. Or perhaps Mr. Nicholson would like to come on, sit with myself and Eva and Sally and Pete Wishart, and we'll have a chat. I'm sure you wouldn't mind standing down for that one, Lloyd.
Oh, absolutely.
You could sell the tickets. And we'll 50-50 the money. But we'll bring on as many independent candidates as we can. I'll even bring on some unionists. If any of you unionists want to step up, come on, give us a positive case for the union. I'll have anyone on here within reason. If you want to talk and be serious, we will bring you as much as we can. Some of the stuff you won't get, but we will always be as honest as we can, open as we can, and give you our opinions. It's our opinions. You, my viewers, have got to make up your own minds. You've got to decide if it's SNP, Labour, Tory, or ISP, or ALAPA, or our Eva, or our Sally. And if it's not our Eva or our Sally and I find out, you'll be getting blocked. But until I see you again, you and yours, please, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.